Databases are used to power nearly every mobile app on the market. Altova MobileTogether allows developers to create data-driven mobile apps in record time, regardless of the type of database used on the backend. By the end of this tutorial, you should be able to create a new project with a connection to a database, retrieve and display all records in the database, and format this data using a pair of tables. During this tutorial, it will be assumed that you have a baseline knowledge of the MobileTogether Designer's interface and an understanding of the basic terms used throughout the designer. If this is the first video you have seen or you are unfamiliar with the designer, please start with the tutorial linked in the description below. This tutorial covers the user interface in depth and walks you through creating and running a basic app. This series will cover the steps needed to reproduce the Books example project included with Altova MobileTogether. The Books example pulls and modifies data from a SQLite database containing information on books. New books can be added and existing books can be viewed, edited, or deleted. The main interface provides options for customizing how data is formatted and allows for two different methods of filtering. This example project, along with the SQLite database, can be found in the MobileTogether Examples folder. To get started, you will first need to create a new project. Create this project by navigating to the File menu and selecting New. Immediately save this project to the location you have set up. Note that it is not necessary to save the project in the same folder as the data. With the new project created, it's time to set up your first page and data source. First, rename the main page from New Page 1 to Main Page. This will help to organize things a bit better once your project starts to grow in both size and complexity. Next, you will need to add your first data source. This is the link that will allow your app to retrieve data from the Books database. Add a data source by clicking on the green plus sign in the Page Sources pane. Select New DB Structure from the list of potential sources and click Next. For this project, we will leave all values on the Add Page Source window at their default values. Click on the Finish button. The Books project pulls data from a SQLite database file, but as you can see, all major database formats are supported within MobileTogether. To connect to a SQLite database, select the SQLite option and click Next. On the connection page, choose to use an existing SQLite database, click Browse to locate and open the Books database, and then click Connect. The Insert Database Objects window will give you a view of all tables available to be loaded. Expand the Tables branch, select Books, and then click OK. Double-click on the data source and rename it to Books. This will make it easier to use in the future. You now have a connection to the Books database. Utilizing this connection will retrieve all data from the database and push it to the users of your app. In later tutorials, I will demonstrate how to build a query to limit the data being pulled from the database and pushed to the user. Now that we have a place to pull data from, it's time to set up the interface. The interface we will be building should consist of a repeating row that has a divider underneath each piece of data. The data itself will be displayed in a tabular format with labels on the left and data on the right. On the far right will be a small image of the book's cover. This is most easily accomplished in the designer using two tables. The first table will be a 2x2 table with the bottom two rows merged together to hold the horizontal line. This table will be what repeats for each record. The top right column of the table will contain the image file and the top left will contain an embedded table. The embedded table should contain two columns, one to hold the labels and one to hold the data, and then 6 rows with each row containing a piece of data from the database. Start by creating the first table by dragging a table control to the designer. This table will contain 2 static columns and 2 dynamic rows, which will repeat for each record. Set the number of static columns to 2, and then select dynamic rows and configure 2 repeating rows. You should now see the table created in the designer. There is a 2x2 table contained in the middle of a marker showing the entire repeating row. This row will need to be linked to an element so that MobileTogether knows what to iterate over. Make this connection by dragging the row element from the Books data source to the repeating row. You should see the entire row highlighted with a blue border as you are making the connection, and will see the row data source reflected at the top of the table. Next up, let's add a horizontal line that spans across both columns. Drag a horizontal line control to the bottom left cell of the repeating table. If you look closely, you can see that the horizontal line has been created, but it only covers half the width of the table. To span this across the whole table, you need to merge both columns on the second row. Perform the merge by selecting the bottom left cell and clicking on the Join Right button on the toolbar. This action will retain the contents of the left cell and merge it with the right cell. This causes the horizontal line to now span the entire table. The upper left cell of the repeating table will contain the bulk of the data being displayed to the user. There are 6 pieces of data to be displayed to the user along with their labels. A 2x6 table should be created to handle this. Drag a new table control to the upper left cell of the repeating table. All cells and rows will be static in this table. Set the number of columns to 2 and the number of rows to 6, and then click OK. Drag a label control to the first cell and set the text to title, as this row will contain information about the title of the book. Next, drag the title element from the book's data source to the right column and select Label from the menu that pops up. At this point, your project is far enough along that you can run your first test to verify the repeating elements are set up and that the data sources are configured correctly. Run the simulator by clicking the green Simulate Workflow button on the toolbar or by pressing F5. Note that your interface may look different than what is displayed if you have selected a different preview device. You can see that all the book titles are successfully displayed to the user along with the horizontal rule between each of the rows. The formatting doesn't look great, but we'll fix that shortly. Click on the Close button or press Escape to close the simulator. Repeat these steps for the repeating rows. Add a label with an element name on the left and a label with the data itself on the right. Now that you have all the labels and elements on the board, let's do some work on the formatting. To make this look better, let's set the labels on the left to be a bit smaller with italics. You can select all cells by using the Shift key and set your formatting options using the buttons on the toolbar. Note that the cells are still limited to an equal share of the table, something that is also not ideal. With all of the labels on the left selected, navigate to the Table Column property in the Styles and Properties pane and select Wrap Content. This will reduce the width of the column to be only as wide as it needs to be. Overall, this is better, but it can still be improved a bit by adding a margin to the right side of the labels to open things up a bit. Once again, select all the labels in the left column and adjust the margin by navigating to Margin Right in the Styles and Properties pane and selecting 5 pixels. This adds a 5 pixel margin and makes things a bit easier on the eyes. The last thing to do with this table is to set the text size of the actual data. Select all the controls on the right and then set the text size to small. Finally, it's time to add the image to the upper right column of the repeating table. Do this by dragging the image element to the column and selecting the image control. You will need to tell MobileTogether what format the image is stored in to be displayed to the user. This database stores images as base64. Locate the image source type property in the Properties pane and select base64. Improve the formatting of this column by selecting the image control and centering it using the toolbar. Now set the column width to 20% in the Styles and Properties pane. This will allocate much more space to the data on the left. With those steps completed, your app has been created. Run the simulator once more and verify that all of the data is being displayed properly. In this tutorial, we covered the steps needed to pull data from a database and display it back to the user. We utilized embedded tables with repeating rows and adjusted the formatting on all of the text. You can download MobileTogether Designer for free at www.altova.com/mobile and start creating your mobile apps today.